Max, Ryan, thanks for joining us today. I've never been so excited to talk about health insurance and claims processing. So, here we go.
Thanks for having us. You guys are building Yuzu.
But before we start off talking about Yuzu, I'd love to just know, a little bit more about your guys' story, how you guys met. It's not your first time founding companies. Maybe just give us a little bit of the story behind the story.
It's actually funny. We met 5 years ago at this point or so. And we met through our third co-founder, Russell. And Russell actually sat next to a good friend of mine on an airplane together. And they hit it off. They were both interviewing at a healthcare company in Wisconsin and ended up becoming really close friends. And I got to know Russell over the years through this friend. We started brainstorming ideas. And at one point, like 5 years ago or so, Russell was like, you've got to meet one of the best engineers I know from college, Ryan, and connected us.
Yeah, I had known Russell for a number of years. We ran a dating site back in college called Data Match. Not to get into it too much, but it was like, it used to be this matchmaking service that had been around at Harvard for a number of years. Sort of a big thing that we did was we put it on the internet and then sort of spread it throughout the US. So it went from just being at Harvard to, I think it's still active today at a couple dozen schools, and it's kind of fun. And we sort of worked very closely together. I was like the engineering guy. He was like sort of the operations guy even back then. And then funnily enough, it was actually Data Match was how I met my fiance. She was sort of like on the business team and like sort of worked with Russell. And so I owe a lot to that club and sort of had, obviously kept in touch with my fiance, but then also kept in touch with Russell over the years. Like, I think we worked very well together, and I'd sort of been begging him like, Russell, we got to like start a company. And he's like, and over the years, just like, we will, just like not now, like we'll wait for the right time. And I think one day I sort of like, I had asked him and he was like, I know the perfect guy that would complement us. Like, introduced me to Max. I think we got lunch on a random day, like, sort of like in the basement somewhere. And I think within 30 minutes of meeting each other, we were just like, I think it was you who was just like, let's do this.
Let's go do this thing. Yeah. It was like very quick. It's crazy to think that was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And we started the company about 4 years ago at this point.
Okay.
Time flies.
Okay. So you guys have both started companies before. You guys have also both worked in financial services, fintech.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe talk a bit about that for a minute.
Yeah. I've always been really interested in startups as long as I can remember. I've always liked building things and tinkering. I started my first company when I was 18, and it was in the legal tech space and learned a ton. Didn't really work out, but I really got the startup bug. I was like, all I want to be doing is building, but didn't really know what I wanted to build. Had a lot of ideas and was really excited about fintech, and ended up joining Capital One in their strategy group, and found it really exciting because it's actually still founder led. It's a $100 billion bank at this point, but fundamentally it started out as a startup. And learned a ton there. Ended up moving from there to Bain, where I continued kind of learning about different types of companies and understanding what worked and what didn't. And my take on consulting generally is the storytelling aspects and synthesizing a bunch of data is really interesting and helpful. But I continued to have the urge to build things and ended up jumping into Yuzu from there.
Yeah. And for me, like I similarly had tried to do a small fintech company back in college. It was trying to like help college students save money. I think I learned very quickly that college students love to spend money. So it wasn't like quite alignment there. But sort of had always been a big fan of like fintech. Was a big fan of a product called privacy.com. Like I sort of like used it all the time, like in my personal life. It's sort of like this card issuing, like consumer centric website. And sort of like via being a fan and like sort of working on this fintech app was introduced to the founder of what is now called Lithic. And it was a fun time, like reflecting on my time at Lithic of the company transitioning from being this consumer product, privacy.com, to now what it is today, which is like this very sort of API driven like backend product. And I think sort of that time there like brought a lot of the learnings from fintech to Yuzu and sort of shaped how we thought about it even day one.
I want to go a little bit into the story of Yuzu now. For everyone watching, all of our viewers touch healthcare, right? Whether as a consumer or an investor or maybe a builder or operator within healthcare. We know there are a lot of problems with our nation's healthcare system. Maybe ground us a little bit in that and then talk about how are you guys building Yuzu to solve some of these issues?
It really, if you think about health insurance today, I think it's clear to anyone in the US that something's not working. Health insurance premiums in 26 were the steepest cost increase in 15 years, and 27 is looking even worse. NPS amongst the major 5 health insurers is at an all-time low. There's no transparency into how dollars are spent, into what things cost, into when claims are paid. And there's really just no visibility into how the system works. It's kind of this black box with a million inputs, and members and providers and even employers themselves don't really know what's going on. So Yuzu's mission at its core is to solve this. And we believe that by bringing trust and transparency back into healthcare, we can really help reimagine what the system could look like. And we're doing that with health insurance administration. And we almost got into this by accident. I think it's actually helpful to hear the story of what got us here. But we started out when we first met up and started building 4 years ago, trying to build a new health insurer ourselves. And the thesis was all of our peers who were in tech and starting companies or joining early companies were trying to find the right health plan for them. And our take was, why is there no universal health insurance for startups out there? So we set out to build it. And we've since pivoted, but the original idea was like, what does it take to reimagine all of the core components of a health plan? We wanted to include the ability for members to shop for care. We wanted to include gym memberships. We wanted to make sure everything was really transparent, so there was no like unknown cost of care when you go to the doctor. And it got us really deep into the bowels of like, how does a health plan work? If we're going to go and build one of these, and frankly, we were pretty naive at the time.
Yeah.
And as we like looked into that, building this thing out, it started out as like, what does that even look like? It's kind of like a triangle of what a health insurer actually does. On one corner, you have plan design, and that's who's the network of doctors that members can go to. It's what's your deductible? Is there a gym membership included in the plan? How is care navigated? All of that is in the core plan design aspect. The next corner is risk. If you have a catastrophic incident, who pays the claim? And it turns out that insurers actually outsource a lot of that to reinsurers. And then on the third corner, you have admin. And that's the like, what's the glue that keeps the whole thing together? It's processing claims, it's handling eligibility, it's managing money and moving money around. It's managing reports and creating custom reports based on how the plans are performing. And what we realized is like, there were a bunch of companies out there that had sort of turnkey plan designs. And even for us trying to build this new age health insurer, there were networks we could use. There were pre-built out plans that we could configure. And on the risk side, there were a number of reinsurers who were willing to take on the risk. That's their entire business. But on the admin side, and this admin, it's called third-party administration and health plans, no one was out there that was actually building this in a new way. The only plans that existed, the only health plan TPAs, were essentially legacy companies with like 15 solutions stitched together. And they'd outsource claims management. They'd outsource reporting, like all of these things that we thought were their jobs. It was actually like 5 different companies behind the scenes doing it. And it turns out there's actually like third-party administrators, TPAs, for TPAs. It's this like really long game of telephone where like they're all doing different things. And what we realized is if we wanted to launch our own plan, none of these TPAs could actually support any of the nuances that we were trying to build into the plan. And even the notion of turnkey health insurance for a bunch of fast-growing startups was not supportable by the TPAs around at that point in time. So almost out of necessity, we were like, okay, if we're going to build a new age health plan, if we're going to bend the cost curve in healthcare and change the way members access care, we need to reimagine what a TPA looks like from first principles. And that is what got us to where we are today, of saying we're this operating system for health plans.
Well, thanks, guys. That was a really incredible story. And, one thing that I also love is, so often many great companies start with a founding team that has a really bold and ambitious idea. They go down one path, and some of the best companies end up being pivots, right? You figure out, okay, this is actually the best place to go build, to reach your end mission. So It's a really incredible story. Maybe will you just to go a little deeper on what you guys are building at Yuzu, talk to us about your customers. Who are they? What's going on in kind of the underlying market with your customers who are starting health plans, and maybe give us a tangible example of what one can do with Yuzu now that just wasn't feasible before.
Yeah, I feel like the exciting part about what we're doing is like we're enabling like a lot of people that thought running a health plan would be too hard and not something that they'd ever consider to actually consider it, right? I think we look at our customers and like there are all sorts of organizations that have existed throughout the healthcare space in general and have been sort of like hungry to do more. Like examples is like one of our customers was formerly a brokerage, right? Which is generally the party just responsible for like procuring health insurance for a company, but sort of saw that there was like a lack of like a plan that really suited their customers and wanted to do more and be this health plan. But sort of like there are a lot of blockers there. Like it's quite hard to be a health plan like right out of the gate. But sort of like with our technology, we can actually like allow those people to do it, right? And sort of like you look across our customer board, it's like everyone has been in the space, but sort of not to this extent. Like not, and they're hungry to get their hands dirty, and so. And I think like to sort of speak a little bit about like what that actually means in the product. Um, Kind of frankly, it's the fact that we sort of do what we say is already a differentiator in the space. And so like I think a good example is that like a lot of like what we take for granted in software today, like smooth onboarding processes, like a website to even sign into, was actually not super relevant or not super common like in healthcare, right? Sort of even onboarding a group was this very manual process. Like, it's sending PDFs back and forth. It's like double checking via email whether something has gone through. It's like calling the sort of HR representative to like get more information. I think even step one was like putting it on a website, like having an onboarding flow with like forms and like way to keep track of things and like actually store them and sort of like if there's anything missing, like auto send an email, like follow up, was sort of revolutionary in some ways. I think a lot of TPAs, like, because there's so much upfront work with each and every group, would actually refuse to go down market, right? It's like, anything under 50 people was considered like a small group. But for us, like, because we had built this software and we could just send someone a link where they can sort of fill something out, that sort of was game changing, right? Suddenly, like a lot of our customers can go and sell to a lot of these smaller businesses and sort of not have to be hampered with like all the extra sort of services work of just like getting them on board. I can sort of go line by line of like in the product suite of like just bringing things to the 21st century, like has really unlocked a lot of our customers to like be able to sell and like have this product be actually somewhat enjoyable to use. Well, like healthcare is still an industry where everyone's using fax, and so like even step one of like getting things like online and sort of like being able to sort of distribute work in that way has really unlocked like a lot of like what our customers are able to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is, I think our customers are often on the bleeding edge of what is changing in healthcare. How can we like reimagine a plan so that it puts members first and actually contains costs? And before Yuzu, again, to Ryan's point, they just like didn't have the ability to do this. If they wanted to do anything that wasn't exactly what you think of as a health insurance plan today, they were sort of stuck. And we give them this platform that's very nimble, that's very flexible, and works around their needs. And they could go and configure their own plans and then have everything be white labeled for them so that they're actually fully the plan as they're going to market. And I think all of that is like pretty revolutionary in the space.
Yeah. So, okay. So you guys are basically powering this, groundswell of innovation that's happening in healthcare. These new plans that are being created, you're basically creating the foundational technology that's allowing them to even exist. What about on the other end of the spectrum, right? So someday these new plans will serve millions and millions of customers, but today, there are also very large health insurance companies that serve hundreds of millions of Americans. What are those potentially in scope for you as customers?
Yeah, the way I see it is the largest insurers are still pushing the edge of innovation. And United's fastest growing product, for example, it's called Surest, is a dynamic copay plan that's been evolving very quickly. And most of that claims processing is actually reliant on third-party administrators. And for other insurers and United as well to go and continue to test the boundaries of what types of plans they can support, they, similarly to all these small upstart plans, need infrastructure to enable that. And our infrastructure is flexible, whether it's a massive carrier who wants to test out a new incentive structure in terms of their plan design, or if it's a brand new upstart that's saying we're going to start from scratch and rebuild this thing. They still need core infrastructure to build on, and that's what we're offering.
Walk us a little bit further into some of what you guys have done around building the product, right? So you guys have been very opinionated about owning every piece of software in-house. You know, talk about what that allows you to do kind of going forward.
So traditionally, companies like us would sort of outsource like larger components, right? I think a big part of it is claims processing software. Not many TPAs have their own. It was very much a priority as soon as we started to have it homegrown for us, right? And I think that sort of enabled like one major thing is that by bringing all of what traditionally has been outsourced in-house, we can be the responsible party. And so what does that mean? I think a lot of the frustration that people have with healthcare is just knowing what is going on. When you call sort of a hotline and you ask, what is the status of my claim? And like the support is unable to give an answer. I think a big reason is that like a lot of like what the traditional sort of playbook is that like it's someone else's problem. Right. And so like, and maybe it's not so like crass, right? But I think it's like you are handicapped when you are relying on other people on like a mission critical thing. And like, you're not sure like when, like there's not enough transparency of like, whereas like if we bring it in house, we are the ones that are responsible to be able to say the status of the claim, like why it was adjudicated in a certain way. Right. Like we are sort of responsible, but in a lot of sense, like that has actually enabled us to sort of move fast and automate more, right? We sort of like don't need to build out all these processes and technology to sort of like integrate with others. We can sort of reinvest a lot of that R&D into actually making like our thing great. And I think like being the responsible party puts the entire company a little bit on edge to be responsible, right? It's like we can't sort of hide behind others. We need to be able to confidently like make judgments. And I think that keeps us sharp. I think it keeps our sort of product decision making like really sharp and fast. And it keeps the bar high. I think it's quite exciting like when people join to realize the extent of what we do. I think I have these conversations with engineers all the time. And they're like, oh, so you guys like integrate with an insurance company. And I'm like, no. It's like, oh, but you guys like work with like the insurance company or like the claims adjustment firm, right? And you're just like more of this glue. And I'm like, no. We print our cards in-house. Like the sort of member ID cards that our members receive in the mail was sort of like printed by like this big machine that we have in our office. And sort of that I think clicks with people of like, oh, this is like truly a company that goes deep. And like, like even with 1/1, it's like, I think to improve like the member ID card experience, right? It's like we had to improve like the member portal experience, like something that's often overlooked by sort of other software, right? But to improve the member portal experience, it means that we have to open up a lot of like what was sort of just for employers, right? I think there's like this natural like push and pull of like when we are the responsible party and sort of like the transparency is on our shoulders to really step up and like move faster and like and it has enabled us to do so for so long. Yeah,
It's awesome. Where do you think AI plays a role in building the kind of full system of record operating system that you guys have put together?
I sort of think of like AI and LLMs as like I watched a lot of cartoons as a kid of just like almost like a brain floating in like a jar of water, right? And it's just like dying to like do anything. And so, but it's kind of, you sit there, right? It's just thinking, it's like, it's not able to do too much. And sort of like a lot of what we've been spending the past couple of years doing is like building out like the body for this brand. Like, like I almost think of like the claims adjudication as like the left arm and like the invoicing is like the right arm. And we're slowly like building out this body where like sort of like our team and our customers are able to sort of operate it sort of like with a remote controller. But over time, right, as it gets really fleshed out and gets like really capable, we can sort of like sort of finally tack on the brain and have it actually start being a little like helping us out, like automating a lot of our workflows, right? Um, Again, to sort of reemphasize like healthcare, like, step one, just getting things on the internet, you know, and then sort of step two is like really like building out these really sort of intuitive workflows that have checks and balances, right? Like sort of like even putting AI and LLMs to the side, it's like we want to be very thorough with our work. We want to always be double checking. I think really building out like a comprehensive portal that allows people to like not only make changes, but also suggest changes and like keep others accountable, right? And I think we've done a good job like really fleshing out that functionality so that when we do want to sort of add that agentic element, right, of like we have like an agent sort of like go through like our accounting and making sure that we're like not making mistakes there, right? That is able to do so in a way that is contained, like it can suggest edits, right? And not necessarily go wild quite yet, but sort of like be allowed to sort of be unleashed in a safe way. And I think it's like even building the pipes, as Max was saying earlier, of just like feeding it the right context, sort of like my longer term view for AI in general is like as the models keep getting better and better, is that the way that the application layer will need to compete is like one, the context, right? Like what can you actually like feed the AI, right? I think by being this in-house product, we are the ones responsible for all the sort of like moving parts. We can sort of like give it the full context it would need. Whereas like if we were to outsource more and more of it, right, it's like it would sort of be more limited in its capacity of like what it can see. And as a result, what it can do, right? Because we sort of have taken a lot of responsibility ourselves, we can actually sort of like take actions to remedy a lot of situations. And sort of like having this being dependent on a separate vendor to do so, you're again handicapped, right? Whereas like, if we sort of have this like very sort of safe sort of body for the LLM where it can sort of like see things and suggest changes and like, in some cases for the low hanging fruit, make changes, right? I think that's like where we'll see rapid acceleration and sort of just like really doubling down and investing in great, like it's great for me in that like everything that we do today sort of like solves two things. It makes our sort of like team and our customers' lives much better by like sort of like making workflows much more intuitive, right? Right. Doing things in a way where, people can sort of like jump in and sort of make changes without having to like be stressed out about like, was it the right one right out of the gate? Then sort of obviously that will make it easier and easier when we can sort of like plug in these models sort of to do the same, right? It's like it's almost like another person on the team, right? You want to like create great software for them, and we've been able to do that. Yeah.
These models, early on when we were first playing around with these, we were thinking, how could we actually leverage these and partner with other TPAs and folks in the space and essentially offer them agentic solutions? And what we realized is they're so fragmented in terms of the systems they use that it's truly impossible to actually see the benefits of an LLM when there's no source of truth. When the data lives in 14 different systems and no one knows what's accurate and what's not, it's impossible to actually unleash this thing and say, go and make your own decisions because, again, the data isn't there and it's truly impossible. So what we realized pretty early on is like, in a world where software is cheaper and faster to build, I think it's more and more important to differentiate by being a system of record or being a source of truth. And it's a lot harder. It takes a lot more time and more energy and more resources and more context to build.
Yeah.
But when you build it, that it's almost trivially easy to slot in an LLM and say, hey, we have all this in one place. Now we can actually see the benefits of AI.
For sure. And look, I think it's a big deal too. I mean, to our knowledge, you guys have built this full system in record time, and you're one of the few out there, right, who's done it.
Yeah.
I mean, probably maybe like one or two other, maybe new age insurance companies, even have anything that comes halfway close. I want to go back to something you guys said sort of in the beginning about your backgrounds. You guys both came from fintech backgrounds, right? Max, you at Capital One, Ryan, you at Lithic. Some might say you're actually an outsider coming into healthcare. I'm curious, are there any learnings from that? Are there any first principles thinking you guys are bringing from your backgrounds in fintech? to this new domain that you guys are building in?
Yeah, I mean, totally. I worked at Lithic for a couple years, right? They're a payments API, specifically around card issuing, but they've sort of expanded the product suite since. And I think sort of day one, it was shocking to realize just how much happened whenever you swiped a credit card. I think it's like one of those things you take for granted every day, of just like when you go to the store, you swipe within a second, it's sort of the payment goes through it, you call it a day. But sort of like working there for a couple years and seeing how like the actual like underlying technology worked, it was just like, oh my God, like how is it even like i- how is it even like an hour, let alone like 1 second? Like the number of things that happen on a swipe is like just so beyond like what is intuitive was intuitive to me, and sort of like my time there was really honing in on like what are the real pure fundamentals that you need to understand in your bones to like enable it to be like 1 second, right? I think it's like really dissecting like what is a payment, right? There's ACH payments, there's like card payments, like how are they tied together, how are they different, right? And it's like really sitting and like sort of like with a fine comb and sort of like truly understanding like what something is. And like I think that was a muscle that I sort of really developed at my time over there. And sort of like when we were starting Yuzu, sort of it felt very similar, right? It's like the standard in healthcare is that a claim needs to be paid in 30 days, and sort of my first observation was like, why 30 days? Like, why not 30 minutes? Like, why not 30 seconds? Like, why not 1 second? Sort of like a card payment, right? And sort of, I think what we realized was that no one really sat down and sort of did the same exercise that fintech has done for the past like decade, right? Of just like really with a fine tooth comb, understanding like what is a claim, right? I think sort of like that seems like a very obvious question. A claim is when a hospital sends a bill and like you pay the claim. But I think there's a lot of nuance that you need to capture to sort of shave down 30 days to like 1 day. And sort of like one thing that our early team, particularly like I want to shout out like our first engineer, Pam, sort of like built out was like this really in-depth claims engine, right? I think it's stuff like tying, like often, for example, we're sent a claim, but then we're sent an edit to the claim, right? It's like the hospital was like, oh, actually, we forgot this service, and sort of like we need to flesh out this other service. You owe us a different amount. A lot of other claim systems don't actually tie those things together and understanding that it's the same claim. In their eyes, it used to be that there were sort of two separate instances and you just void the original one. And sort of like now the new one is like the claim. But for us, like the nuance of like tying them together and sort of like adjusting the adjudication flows around that was sort of like the seemingly very subtle thing, but had major ramifications down the road of like how we actually like view and adjudicate claims. And I would say like the past couple of years has really been defining those sort of pure fundamental elements of like healthcare that like no one else has quite done to this point. So it's like, what is a medical claim? What is a pre-certification, right? As we expand out sort of our cash pay product, where we're trying to encourage people to sort of ask, sort of like work with one of our customers before they actually get the care, and we can issue them a credit card that sort of covers like the health plan responsibility amount. Is that a claim? Is the receipt a medical claim, right? And it's sort of like it sometimes feels a bit silly to like maybe in a vacuum like talk about like sort of stuff like this, but it really needs to get done, and like how we're gonna bring that 30 days down, right? And I think that's like the take that the thing that we brought over from fintech, right, as to health tech is like, how do we truly automate this? And like a lot of nuance. It's like, how do you like create general solutions that handle a lot of this nuance? And I think no one just sat down and thought about it. So I think
I think we really, it's funny, we originally bonded over, we both really like this book, The Anatomy of a Swipe. And it's about all of the mechanics that happen behind a credit card transaction. And I remember reading this years ago back in college, and I was like, this is so interesting. It's like you go to the store, you swipe a card. It seems like everything's simple, but behind the scenes, there's a million parties involved that have to make authorization and payment decisions all in real time or near real time. And it's just such a massive, widespread product, card transactions that's like almost solved, right? Like people know how this works. There are a million fintech companies that do this quite well. But claims processing, which from a volume perspective and a dollars perspective is actually like really, really meaningful. I'm sure it's significantly larger than, many types of card volume. Doesn't have anything near this level of sophistication in terms of how the claims are processed. And like early days, we just bonded over this of like, how could you really rethink claims processing the same way major fintech companies rethought credit card payments?
And talking about being outsiders, like we definitely had a certain level of naivety going in.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, we're gonna take 30 days and make it 3 seconds, like right out of the gate, And I think one thing we realized, like, this is really challenging stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, having that naivety to jump in and thinking you can do this is like the first step to actually doing it, right? And I think we've been humble enough to like sort of realize like areas that we sort of didn't know enough about and like doing our research, but also like, bringing that sort of like new perspective and like sort of like I think in a lot of life, right? Like you need that external element to make you realize that you can recontextualize things and that you can actually achieve more, right? It's like I don't know, I think about like the 4-minute mile all the time. Not that like we're doing anything like, I think it's quite exciting, but like, it took that first person to break the 4-minute mile before everyone was able to do it. I think for us, we want to be the first people that sort of like break the 30-day thing and sort of like really, I think we'll see like drastically let that time sort of.
I think that's where automation is interesting. Of like our thesis and everything is you have to build the pipes before you can apply AI, before you can automate processes. And a claims engine is no different. I think the vast majority of health insurers and health insurance startups and TPAs out there outsource claims processing and claims processing software to a bunch of third parties. And even again, TPAs are using all these third party claims software vendors. It's extremely, extremely hard to build this in-house. But the only way you can actually automate claims processing in any meaningful way or apply LLMs into this is if you rebuild that foundation from scratch.
Totally. Yeah. It's super interesting. And thanks so much for walking us through that. Slightly different question. So I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
Those who know the TPA business or the healthcare business really well would say, you guys are doing something really hard. The TPA business has low margins. It's very services heavy, right? What do you think changes going forward, considering what you guys have built? And how are you guys reimagining what a TPA might look like?
Yeah, I mean, jumping in, I can totally see why they feel that way. It was that way in the beginning, right? I think a lot of our sort of, as we're sort of dipping our toes into the space, to even get a sense of like what to build, like we did it ourselves, right? And so like, in the early days, like even I was taking customer support calls and like as sort of I was, like Max was like initiating invoices, right? It was very much like us sort of doing things manually to sort of get a sense of like what actually needs to get done here. A lot of the software that's sort of like others use were written like quite some time ago, right? And sort of like we're very much built for a world that like used to exist. But sort of like fast forward today, like as like you would expect like the healthcare industry to be different 20 years later, right? And like it's been hard for them to sort of tailor the software for like this new world. Whereas for us, it's like coming in with a fresh, clean slate, right? We realize like a lot of like the service heavy work can actually be quite automated, right? It's like at our time, like at sort of at fintech companies, like we knew that a lot of the financial automation could be done in a way that like traditionally they would hire sort of teams of accountants to like keep track of things in Excel, like, like a pretty standard way. We saw that like it didn't need to be that way, right? Sort of from our experience, I think a lot of the advancements in the past couple of years with like, with AI, like sort of allows us to like have a great sort of customer support roadmap, right? Where it's like a lot of our team sort of has to deal with like both the really simple cases, like people call and check the status on like a claim or a thing. Whereas like a lot of that could just be like immediately wiped away, right? With not only like, like better AI, but even just better software, right? Like having a website again to like search these things, sort of shaved off a lot of those sort of service related works. I think for us, it's like we saw that like everything that was done like was being done manually, but didn't need to be. And I think it just really took us doing it ourselves for a few months as we sort of initially building out the roadmap and sort of building out V1 of the product to sort of realize that.
And even beyond automation, I think there's like a principle we hold true to, which is delete before automate. And I think there's a lot of processes in this space
Absolutely.
that can just be deleted. And it's easy to automate, and AI obviously makes that even easier. But even better than automating a process that shouldn't exist in the first place is like thinking from first principles. Why is this here? Can you delete it?
Yeah.
And even the whole concept of a claim. I mean, many of the plans we power leverage cash pay, which was sort of this idea we had of, can you, as a member, when you're going to a provider, essentially get a credit card and pay upfront for that care and pull that funding directly from your insurance plan. And the nice thing is that the provider gets paid in real time. They don't have to wait 3 months to collect that money. And in turn, they're willing to take a pretty heavy discount. So the member gets to shop for care and gets to pay upfront. The provider gets paid faster and often gets paid more than an insurer might pay many months later. So it's kind of a win for everyone. And on the back end, there's no traditional claim. So the whole filing process and prior auth process and all of these things that typically would happen alongside that transaction are now gone. And I think that's one of like 10,000 things that we've thought about of how can you delete before you immediately move to automation.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I mean, you guys know this. I work with a handful of consumer fintech companies too. And, like this notion of delete before you automate, you can find it sort of in, the last generation of customer support, right? The best form of customer support is when no one has to call you. If the customer is calling you, you have failed them. So to the extent you can do self-serve or make the product so good that it's unnecessary, I think it just completely changes the equation. So a lot of small things add up, and I think that's what I'm hearing from you guys as well.
Totally. And then on the gross margin perspective, I think it's also interesting that these TPAs, who historically are low margin, use so many different systems. I know I keep harping on this point, but each of those systems costs money. Forgetting about the complexity and the integration and the learnings required to use them, they're expensive. And if you have 10 of these systems that we've gone and said we can rebuild these in-house all in one integrated system, our cost basis is obviously very different. So from a pure financial angle, the margin profile looks fundamentally different.
Yeah. Awesome. So look, we've gone into a deep dive on Yuzu. Obviously, this wouldn't be possible without the team and culture you guys have built. I know you guys are very proud of it. Tell us a little bit about the folks you have around you and what unique culture you guys have built at Yuzu.
We've really focused on team is everything, right? Fundamentally, team is everything in the company. And I think our view is bring on amazing high slope people. And because, we don't come from a TPA background, we over-index on like aptitude and willingness to learn and willingness to get their hands dirty and just sheer slope of how quickly can someone dive in, get up to speed, learn, and contribute. And that is the most important thing we look for as we're hiring. That along with curiosity. And our team is really built of a lot of these relatively young, high slope people who have been thrown into the deep end of health insurance operations.
Yeah.
And like Ryan, Russell, and I in the early days, and still will do all of the manual processes just to kind of understand how things work. And we require every single person who joins the team to really get in the weeds of health insurance. So that means paying invoices, printing ID cards, handling member and provider support calls, like all of these things that a lot of folks don't necessarily expect to be doing. It's the best way to learn. And if we throw everyone into the fires of health insurance operations, one, they really quickly get context. And in a world where AI enables cheaper and faster product development, and there's going to be more products built, it's really, really important for really smart folks who are eager to learn to have high context. And those folks, whatever role they're in, can then work with our engineering team really tightly and work with our product folks and build out a better product, again, because they have this context, because they're doing the work they have ideas on what can be automated and what can be deleted.
I have like a fun story around that of like, so again, we like print ID cards in house. And like, I remember towards the end of last year, there was like a meltdown, like our machines broke. We were running them so much that like the internal components started to like melt into each other. And there was like a panic because it's like we needed to get these out the door real fast before sort of everyone took off for the holidays. So it was sort of like a code red. Everyone, including engineers, like dropped everything, sort of sat and were just like printing out and like stuffing these cards into envelopes, and sort of like making sure that like they got to the post office like before it closed down. And like, I think a lot of people would be like, like, is that the highest like leverage thing that like an engineer could be doing is like stuffing ID cards like sort of late into the evening? And I would argue yes, right? I think it's like as we grow out the engineering team, it's like, it's important like as an engineer to understand like the pain points of like our operations team, our sales team, our customers. And it's like, it is very much a heavy part of your job to understand that in depth. And like sort of a response to that was like a couple engineers realized like, oh my God, like this needs to be like automated and made much more efficient like immediately. And sort of like that was sort of like a tentpole project sort of like coming right out of the year. I think like, I think naturally like we have such a high trust team that like operations like in a lot of situations like doesn't want to sort of like overwhelm like the engineering team of like, oh, like demanding a tons of features. But I think the inverse is like, it's up to engineers to like not sort of like to remember that like we're moving really fast, we're going really fast. It's like, to identify problems because a lot of the times like people like kind of like want to just suck it up and like, sort of like just go about their work and like sort of it doesn't want to bother others, but it's like it's our job to like mitigate like a lot of these problems. And I think sort of like being like feeling it firsthand is like the best way to like really empathize with others. And I think that's like again like what we really look for. It's like how high empathy are you, right? It's like are you someone that like sort of just wants to be given a task and like be very shielded from everything else, or like do you want to like have a lot of like ownership, but at the flip side like be a little bit on the hook when like others sort of downstream sort of both suffer but also benefit from like the things that you do. And I think that's really exciting for a lot of people, right? I think the question that we're all trying to figure out is like, what does software engineering look like in the next few years? And like, without a doubt, like no matter where it goes, like you always want really like strong product minded people, right? You want high empathy people that like just wants to solve like mission critical problems. And for sure, that has always been the case, will always be the case.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and look, I've seen this problem so often, right? Where like, sales teams want to say yes to every customer, and it creates bottlenecks with ops teams and engineers. Engineering teams lack a bit of context, if they're not as close to the customer and what needs to get built. And so just having kind of this cross-pollination among your entire organization, I think is so powerful.
And we do this interesting thing where we love to bring people together and have folks get along outside of work too. If they're going to be working a lot, it's really important that they're friends too.
Yeah.
But at our offsites that we do regularly, we will have engineers and ops folks swap roles for a couple hours.
Yeah.
And almost like shadow each other, but we'll have engineers answering support calls and printing ID cards again and responding to members and providers, with the supervision of the person who normally will do that job, to really show folks what that looks like. And similarly, we'll have our ops team actually go in and try to use, Claude to write code.
Yeah. A number of ops folks are in the code base now. Like, I think a lot of like, as these tools develop, it's like quite cool to be able to like, one, they can sort of ask like what is supported, like what are sort of the subtle nuances to a feature, and like even sort of like ask it to like add a small little thing here and there. And like, that's actually been extremely successful to I think it's tough to be surprised these days with everything going on, but was like one of those moments, right?
Yeah. It's like, so last question for you guys, but you guys have walked us through the business, through your team and culture. If you guys do this right, in the next 10, 20 years, what does our healthcare system look like? Give us an optimistic scenario.
But I actually don't want to be prescriptive on what the health plan of the future looks like. And I think that's kind of the beauty of what we're building. We almost get to be the index. And I fundamentally believe health insurance will evolve in the next 2, 3, 5, 10, certainly 20 years. And there will be an explosion of new health plans launched, whether those are upstarts, whether that's the incumbents launching new product lines, something totally different. Maybe it's a hospital system launching a plan. All of these things will happen, and they are happening. The challenge is there's no platform, there's no infrastructure that allows them to do this. And my hope is that we are the company that powers all of this change and almost can serve as a catalyst for more and more change in the space. So I don't actually want to be prescriptive of like, this is what I think healthcare will look like in 20 years. My bet is that it will look different. And my hope is it will be more affordable and more transparent for everyone. But the question is, when does that happen? And as long as we're the platform powering it and enabling it, I see that going.
Yeah, I feel like if I remember correctly, like Stripe's ethos, like in the early days, was like not trying to be too prescriptive. Like it was like whenever you create a new technology, it's almost arrogant to think that you can sort of like push it to like where you want to take it. It kind of like will take itself to where it sort of deems it best.
Well, guys, healthcare is a $5 trillion problem in America today, which is larger than the GDP of probably every country except for 3 or 4. So if you guys can make even a small dent in that, I think it'd be very good for all of us. But Max, Ryan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys coming in and spending time with us.
Thank you.